The grocery store smelled faintly of cleaning liquid and stale bread. The fluorescent bulbs overhead hummed, casting everything in a pale, tired glow. It was nearly closing hour, and only a few shoppers lingered with baskets that looked as weary as their faces. Elena shifted her own basket against her hip, mentally counting every coin inside her wallet.
Rice. Eggs.
A small packet of flour. That's it. She skipped the fresh fruit section, the bright apples glistening under the misty spray, because she knew she couldn't afford them. She forced her gaze forward, steady, determined. "Mommy." Sophie tugged her hand, her small voice bubbling with excitement. Look. Elena followed the direction of her daughter's pointing finger. A freezer hummed at the corner, glass doors fogging with cold. Behind the frosty glass sat rows of brightly wrapped ice creams, swirls of chocolate, golden foil, and shiny packaging that almost sparkled under the lights. Sophie's eyes widened as if she had stumbled upon treasure. She pressed her little palms against the glass. "Can I have this one? Please, Mommy." Elena's heart twisted. She crouched beside her daughter, brushing a curl away from her forehead. "Not tonight, sweetheart," she whispered, trying to keep her voice light. "We need the money for rent and groceries. Maybe another time." The sparkle in Sophie's eyes dimmed, her shoulders slumping.
But she didn't whine.
She only nodded, the quiet acceptance stabbing Elena deeper than if her daughter had thrown a tantrum. Elena kissed the top of her head and turned toward the bread aisle. "Keep walking, Elena. Don't look back. Don't let her see how much this hurts you too." But Sophie didn't follow. She stayed planted in front of the freezer, her small body stubbornly still, her eyes fixed on the ice cream like it held all the joy in the world. Elena sighed, adjusting the basket in her arm. "She'll come in a second. Let her dream a little longer." Sophie leaned closer to the glass, her breath fogging a circle. She was so focused on the glittering wrappers that she didn't notice her shoelace trailing loose. Her sneaker caught on the edge of the freezer stand, and she stumbled forward with a small gasp. Before she could hit the ground, a hand, strong, sure, caught her arm. Sophie blinked up at the stranger who steadied her. A man in a perfectly tailored black suit, the kind of fabric Elena had only ever seen in glossy magazines. His tie was smooth, his shoes polished, his posture commanding even though he knelt now to meet Sophie's eyes. Elena, still bent over the bread shelf, caught sight of him from the corner of her eye. Something in her stomach clenched. Who dresses like that in this part of town?" The man's voice rolled out deep and low, not loud, but carrying weight. Well, what are you doing here all by yourself, little one?" Sophie tilted her head, unafraid, her small voice clear. "My mommy's buying groceries. I wanted ice cream, but she said no. Cause money is for bills." The words rang out like an arrow to Elena's chest. She froze, loaf of bread forgotten in her hand. Heat rushed to her cheeks, shame pressing down like a stone. "Oh God." She said that to a stranger? The man glanced at the freezer, then back at Sophie. "Which one did you want?" Sophie's face lit instantly. She pointed eagerly. "That one. The gold one." The man opened the freezer, his movements smooth, controlled. He handed her the ice cream, his lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Every queen deserves her crown. And this one looks like yours." Elena's pulse kicked hard. What is he doing?
Who is he?
Sophie's joy bloomed so brightly. Danger, her instinct screamed it. This was not a man to cross. "You shouldn't bother," she began, her voice tight. The man stood, and suddenly he seemed taller than the aisle itself. His presence pressed down on her, not aggressive, but heavy, like the air before a storm. He held the ice cream gently in Sophie's hand, then looked at Elena. "She has good taste," he said simply. His tone was polite, but there was something underneath, something Elena couldn't name, something that made her skin prickle. She forced a strained smile. "She does. But I'm afraid we can't. It's already taken care of." His words were quiet, final. He placed a folded bill on the counter near the register. Crisp green. $100. Elena's breath caught. 100? For an ice cream? Her pride flared, colliding with unease. She wanted to refuse, to push the note back into his hand, but his gaze pinned her where she stood. Not threatening, just unreadable. Sophie giggled, licking the ice cream, her world reduced to chocolate and sweetness. He's the ice cream man, Mommy. The stranger's lips curved, almost amused, but then his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, and Elena noticed the way his expression shifted in an instant. Gone was the faint softness. What replaced it was cold, sharp, like a blade sliding free. Urgency tightened his jaw. He slipped the phone back, gave Sophie a lingering glance, then looked at Elena. His voice was lower now, edged with something weighty. Take care of her. And then he walked away, his footsteps measured, echoing down the aisle until the automatic doors whooshed open and swallowed him into the night. Elena stood frozen, her basket heavy on her arm, her daughter happily swinging her legs on the freezer edge. Her eyes dropped to the $100 bill glinting under the harsh fluorescent light. Her throat tightened. Men like that don't just appear in grocery stores. The city evening was damp and gray, rain clouds pressing low above the crooked skyline. Elena balanced 2 grocery bags against her chest, their thin plastic handles cutting into her palms. Sophie skipped beside her, humming tunelessly, swinging her small arms with every hop. Careful, Elena murmured, adjusting the weight. The milk carton inside clinked dangerously against a jar of peanut butter. If you trip, I can't carry you too. Sophie giggled, skipping anyway, her golden wrapper from last night's ice cream still tucked in her pocket like a souvenir. Elena shook her head, the memory prickling her nerves. That man, the stranger in the suit. She hadn't told anyone about him, not even her neighbor, who always poked her nose into everything. Something about his presence had unsettled her so deeply that she felt safer pretending it hadn't happened. And yet, Sophie still spoke about him as if he were some fairy tale character. The ice cream man was nice, Mommy, she said suddenly, as if reading her mother's thoughts. He had shiny shoes. Elena's chest tightened. Shiny shoes, sharp eyes, money too crisp to belong here. They turned onto their block, the street lamps already glowing orange. Their apartment building loomed ahead, bricks weathered and cracked, the fire escape rusting like old bones. That was when Elena felt it, that prickle on the back of her neck, the sensation of being watched. She slowed, shifting the groceries. Her eyes scanned the street. A black car idled across from the building. Not a dented sedan like the neighbors drove, not an old pickup. This was sleek, long, windows tinted so dark they swallowed the reflection of the streetlights. Its engine purred, too smooth, too quiet. Elena's stomach sank. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her, that the man inside was the same one from the grocery store. Why here? Why us? Her pulse quickened, but she forced her step steady. Sophie tugged her sleeve. Mommy, why is that car sitting there? Don't stare, sweetheart, Elena whispered, ushering her quickly toward the building entrance. The plastic handles dug deeper into her palms, but she didn't dare pause. She unlocked the door, pushed Sophie inside, and only then risked one last glance over her shoulder. The black car remained, motionless, its presence heavier than stone. Elena hurried upstairs, her heart rattling in her chest. She tried to reassure herself. Maybe it's coincidence. Maybe someone rich is visiting next door. Maybe. But deep down, she knew. That man hadn't simply left their lives at the grocery store. Later that night, when Sophie was asleep and the apartment lay quiet except for the hum of the fridge, Elena stood at the window. She pulled back the thin curtain just enough to peek outside. The car was still there. Her hand gripped the window frame. Why us?
What does he want?
She thought of the crisp $100 bill now folded inside her wallet. She hadn't spent it, not yet. She couldn't bring herself to. It sat there like evidence of something she didn't understand. Elena closed the curtain tightly, leaned her forehead against the wall, and whispered to herself, "Don't let him near her. Whatever he is, don't let him near Sophie." But deep down, an uneasy truth pulsed beneath her fear. Her daughter had already let him in. The third day after she noticed the black car, it vanished. For a brief moment, relief bloomed in Elena's chest. Maybe it had all been her imagination. Maybe the man in the suit had simply passed through their neighborhood and forgotten about them. She wanted to believe that. Needed to. But safety, Elena had learned, was never permanent. The following afternoon, while Sophie played hopscotch on the cracked sidewalk outside their building, Elena left work at the diner early. Her manager had cut her hours again, muttering about slow business. Elena bit back the sting of humiliation and walked home with her apron stuffed in her bag, the weight of bills pressing against her ribs. When she turned the corner, she froze. A black town car waited at the curb. Not the same sleek machine from before, but polished all the same, with a driver in a dark cap leaning against the hood. And there, standing in front of her building as if he belonged, was him, the man from the grocery store. His suit today was charcoal gray, tailored and sharp. His hair gleamed under the sunlight, his watch glinting as he checked the time. He looked out of place against the cracked bricks of her building, like a wolf calmly waiting at the door of a henhouse. Elena's chest tightened. Her first instinct was to turn around, grab Sophie, and run. But Sophie saw him first. "Mommy," she squealed, dropping her chalk, skipping forward. "It's the ice cream man." Elena's heart nearly stopped. Her daughter's joy was too loud, too bright. She hurried forward, clutching Sophie's shoulder before she could run into his arms. The man smiled faintly, lowering himself into a polite crouch, so he met Sophie's eyes. "Hello again, little queen," he said, his tone smooth, almost formal. "I see you've been keeping your crown safe." Sophie giggled, holding up the golden ice cream wrapper she still carried in her pocket. "Look, I didn't throw it away." Elena pulled her closer, her voice sharper than intended. "That's enough, Sophie. Go inside, please." Her daughter pouted but obeyed, skipping toward the stairwell door. Elena kept her gaze fixed on the man, waiting until Sophie disappeared before speaking. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice low, tight. "Whatever game you're playing, leave my daughter out of it." He straightened, his presence towering once more. Yet his expression remained calm, almost disarmingly polite. "This isn't a game, Ms. Alvarez," he said smoothly. "I came to speak with you. Strictly business." Elena's stomach twisted.
He knows my name.
"Business?" she repeated, wary. He nodded once. "I represent a group of investors. We've recently acquired several properties and small businesses in the area. One of them is in need of a reliable manager." His gaze rested firmly on her, unwavering. "I thought of you." Elena blinked, taken aback. "Me? Yes." He said it simply, as if it were obvious. "You've worked hard, haven't you? The diner, the cleaning shifts. You deserve better than being tossed crumbs." Her throat tightened. How does he know that? How does he know anything about me? She forced a shaky laugh, more defense than humor. "So, what? You just hand out jobs to strangers you bump into at the grocery store?" Something flickered in his dark eyes, but his tone stayed even. "I believe in rewarding honesty. Your daughter was honest with me, and I respect that." Elena crossed her arms over her chest, trying to shield herself from the strange pull in his presence. "And what's the catch?" "Because there's always a catch." "No catch," he said, though the certainty in his voice only made her more suspicious. "The salary is fair. Hours reasonable. You'll have time for Sophie. That's all."
Elena's mean spoon.
The offer sounded too good, too easy. No one in her world handed out salvation without expecting something in return. And yet the thought of rent being paid on time, of not counting every coin before buying bread, God, how tempting it was. Her eyes narrowed. "Why me?" The man's lips curved just slightly, not quite a smile. "Because you're the kind of woman who keeps fighting, even when the world makes it impossible." "I respect that." Elena's breath caught, heat rising in her cheeks. She hated the way his words slipped under her guard, hated that for one foolish second, they almost felt like kindness. She tightened her grip on her bag. "I don't need your charity." His gaze softened, barely, but enough to notice. "It isn't charity. It's opportunity. You may do with it what you wish. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a card, heavy, cream-colored, embossed with gold letters. No company name, only his. Damien Moretti. He held it out between two fingers. Elena stared at it, her pulse drumming in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her not to take it, and yet her hand moved before she could stop it, slipping the card into her bag. Damien Moretti inclined his head politely, then stepped toward the waiting car. The driver opened the door, and within seconds, the man was gone, leaving only the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. Elena stood frozen at the foot of her building, her bag heavy against her hip, her daughter's laughter echoing faintly from upstairs. She pressed a hand against her chest, her heart racing. Who are you, Mr. Ice Cream Man? And why can't I stop being afraid of you? Elena woke to the sound of the radiator clanking like it was on its last breath. The apartment was colder than it should have been, the thin blanket hardly enough to keep Sophie warm. Her daughter curled beside her, hair in messy curls across her cheek, lips parted in soft sleep. Elena brushed a strand away, her chest aching. She deserves more than this. More than cracked walls and overdue bills. The memory of the gray-suited man outside their building returned like a shadow. His voice.
His card.
That look in his eyes that made her feel seen, and yet trapped. She pushed it from her mind and rose quietly, careful not to wake Sophie. The diner was nearly empty when she arrived for her morning shift. The smell of burnt coffee and grease hung in the air, the cracked vinyl seats sticking against her uniform as she slid behind the counter. Alvarez, her manager, Frank, barked from the back, his cigarette dangling from his lips. Need to cut you early again. Not enough customers. Elena clenched her jaw. Frank, I need these hours. He shrugged, unbothered. Not my problem. Come back tomorrow. Or don't. She swallowed the burn of humiliation. Rent, bills, groceries, how much longer can I stretch nothing? By the time she picked Sophie up from the after-school program, her head throbbed. She held her daughter's hand tightly, forcing a smile when Sophie waved a drawing in her face. Look, Mommy. It's you and me. And a big car. Like the ice cream man's. Elena's heart skipped. She forced her smile wider. That's beautiful, sweetheart. But her chest tightened. Even Sophie's drawings carried him now. That evening, as Elena carried laundry down to the basement, she nearly tripped over an envelope tucked beneath her door. Frowning, she bent and picked it up. Inside was cash, neatly stacked bills, and a single typed note. For emergencies only.
DM.
Her hands trembled. Heat rose in her chest. Not gratitude, not relief, but anger. How dare he? How dare he push his way into my life like this? Into my home. She shoved the envelope deep into her drawer, slamming it shut. But the weight of it burned against her conscience, like it was daring her to touch it again. Later that night, Elena sat at the table with a notebook, pencil scratching as she tried to budget the few dollars left in her wallet. Rent already late. Electric bill threatening shut-off. Food barely enough. Her eyes drifted to her bag, where his card still lay hidden. She hadn't meant to keep it. But she hadn't thrown it away either. What if just for Sophie? No, she whispered to herself, snapping the notebook closed. She pressed her palms hard against the table, as if she could shove the temptation away. She would not sell herself to a stranger. Not to a man who carried shadows in his wake. But that night, when the radiator groaned uselessly and Sophie shivered in her sleep, Elena lay awake staring at the ceiling. Damien Moretti's name pulsed in her mind, heavy as a heartbeat. She hated him. She feared him. And yet, God help her, she couldn't stop wondering what it would feel like to finally say yes. The first snow of the season fell heavy that week, turning the sidewalks into slush and the air into a knife against bare skin. Elena wrapped Sophie in every sweater she owned, but still her little nose turned pink as they walked home from school. Mommy, it's cold, Sophie whispered, her teeth chattering. Elena tightened her grip on her daughter's hand, her chest aching. Just a few more blocks. Just get her inside. When they reached their apartment, the worst blow waited. A bright orange notice taped to the front door. Final warning. Payment due immediately. Elena ripped it down quickly, stuffing it into her bag before Sophie could read. Her stomach hollowed out. God, not now. Please, not in the middle of winter. That night, as the radiator gave only a weak sigh of heat, Sophie's small cough broke the silence. It started soft, then grew, ragged and persistent. Elena rushed to her side, pressing a hand against her forehead.
Warm.
Too warm. No, 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 Elena whispered, grabbing the worn thermometer. The reading made her throat close, fever. She pulled Sophie into her arms, rocking gently, whispering lullabies against her damp hair. But inside, panic clawed at her ribs. She had no medicine left. No money for a doctor. Her eyes stung as they drifted to the drawer. The one with the envelope. The one with Damien Moretti's neat stack of bills. Her hand trembled as she opened it. The cash stared back at her, silent and waiting. For emergencies only. Tears burned her eyes as she clutched it. I'm sorry, baby, she whispered to Sophie. I can't let you suffer just because I'm proud. By morning, Elena had done the unthinkable. She used the money. Fever medicine, soup, warm blankets. Sophie's cough softened, her breathing eased, and relief washed through Elena like sunlight after a storm. But it came with shame, heavy and sharp. I let him in. I swore I wouldn't, but I did. 2 days later, her landlord cornered her on the stairs. His belly strained against his shirt, his voice dripping with impatience. Ms. Alvarez, I can't wait anymore. Rent's late. Another week and you're out. Understand? Elena nodded numbly, her pulse thundering in her ears. She wanted to argue, to beg for time, but the words stuck like stones in her throat. She climbed the rest of the stairs in silence, Sophie's hand in hers, her mind a battlefield. At the top, as if fate itself had been waiting, she saw him. Damien Moretti, leaning casually against the wall near her door, dark coat draped over his shoulders, a presence that seemed to fill the entire hallway. His eyes found hers instantly, steady, unwavering. Elena's breath caught. Her first instinct was anger. He has no right to be here, but beneath it was something else. Something dangerous. Relief. As if some part of her had known he would come. Ms. Alvarez, he greeted smoothly, inclining his head. His gaze flicked briefly to Sophie, then back to her. May we talk? Elena stood frozen. Sophie pressed against her side, the weight of the envelope in her bag like a brand. She wanted to say no. She wanted to slam the door and lock it. But the image of Sophie coughing through the night, fever burning her little body, silenced the refusal on her lips. Her voice came out softer than she expected. Talk. Damien's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile, not quite a victory, but as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. And just like that, Elena realized she had stepped over a line she could never fully step back from. Elena hesitated before opening the door wider. Damien stepped inside, with a kind of presence that made the small apartment feel even smaller. His dark coat brushed against the doorframe, polished shoes too fine for the worn linoleum beneath them. Sophie peeked out from behind Elena, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Damien lowered himself into a crouch, bringing his gaze level with the child's. His sharp edges softened in an instant. Hello, princess, he said, voice calm, almost warm. Do you remember me? Sophie's eyes lit faintly, shy but curious. You bought me ice cream. That's right. Damien nodded slowly, as if it had been the most important transaction of his life. The best kind, wasn't it? Sophie giggled softly, then hid her face against Elena's side. Elena's stomach twisted. This careful tenderness wasn't what she had expected from him. Damien rose, turning back to Elena, his gaze steady, but not invasive. She means a great deal to you. She's my whole life, Elena replied quietly, brushing Sophie's curls with trembling fingers. He inclined his head. Then that makes her my concern too. Elena bristled. She's not your responsibility. No, Damien admitted, his voice even, almost too calm. But that doesn't mean I won't care. He stepped closer, careful not to overstep, yet his presence filled the room like a vow. If she ever falls ill again, if she so much as sneezes, you call me. Do you understand? Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to push him away, to argue that she didn't need his interference. But the memory of Sophie's fever only nights ago, the helpless terror, silenced her protest. Fine, she said finally, clipped guarded. Damien studied her for a beat longer, then gave a single nod. As he turned to leave, his last words lingered in the air like a promise. No hesitation, Miss Alvarez. Call me. That night, snow pressed against the thin window glass, wind howling like a warning. Sophie's cough returned, harsher this time, scraping her throat raw. Elena sat beside her, wiping her damp forehead with a cool cloth. It's okay, baby, she whispered, rocking gently. The medicine will help. But hours dragged by, and the medicine did nothing. Sophie's fever climbed higher, her small body trembling beneath the blankets. Then, terrifyingly, she went still. Her lips were pale, her eyes rolling back as her tiny frame went limp. Panic exploded in Elena's chest. Sophie. Sophie, wake up. She shook her gently, terror clawing up her throat. Her hands fumbled for her phone, tears blinding her vision. She thought of ambulances, of long waits, of bills she could never pay. Her heart clenched around one name. One card still hidden in her drawer. Her fingers trembled as she dialed. Please, please, God, pick up. The call connected after a single ring. His voice, steady as stone. Elena? Her breath broke. It's Sophie. She's burning. She fainted. I don't know what to do. Stay calm. No hesitation, no panic. His voice cut through hers like steel through smoke. I'm on my way. Don't move her. Keep a damp cloth on her forehead. The line went dead. 15 minutes later, the hallway filled with footsteps. Elena flung open the door, and there he was, Damien, coat unbuttoned, tie loose, followed by a man carrying a heavy black case. This is Dr. Leone, Damien said briskly, guiding the doctor inside. He's the best in the city. The doctor wasted no time. Instruments spread across the table, stethoscope pressed against Sophie's small chest, thermometer replaced with sleek digital tools Elena had never seen before. His hands were precise, practiced, calm. Elena hovered uselessly, wringing her hands, her heart in her throat. She was fine earlier. She was laughing, drawing, and then the fever just... Sho. Damien's hand touched her shoulder, firm but steady. Let him work. The weight of his palm anchored her somehow. After what felt like an eternity, the doctor adjusted Sophie's blanket and looked up. She's stable now. The fever was spiking too fast, but we've lowered it. With rest and medication, she'll recover. Elena collapsed into the nearest chair, her body shaking with relief. Tears streaked her cheeks before she could stop them. Damien crouched beside Sophie again, brushing a damp curl from her face with surprising gentleness. For a man who carried shadows in every step, he looked utterly undone by the sight of a small child suffering. She's strong, he murmured. Not to Elena. Not to the doctor. Just to Sophie, as if it were a secret between them. The doctor packed his tools and left with a polite nod, promising to check in again the next day. Silence fell in the apartment, broken only by Sophie's soft, even breaths. Elena turned to Damien, her voice raw. Why would you do all this? Bring a doctor like that? Stay here, in this place. Damien met her gaze, unflinching. Because you were afraid. Because she needed help. That's all the reason I require. Something inside Elena cracked at those words. Her chest ached with gratitude, but also with confusion. He terrified her. He unsettled her. And yet tonight, he had been the only safe place she could turn. She whispered, barely audible, "Thank you." Damien gave a single nod, then pulled a chair to Sophie's bedside. "Get some rest, Ms. Alvarez. I'll stay." And so he did. Through the long night, while snow buried the city outside, Damien Moretti sat in the dim glow of the lamp, watching over Sophie like a sentinel carved from shadow. Elena, unable to fight exhaustion, drifted into restless sleep on the couch. But before her eyes closed, her last sight was of him, immovable, silent, protective. For the first time in years, she did not feel entirely alone. Elena stirred on the couch, the stiffness in her back pulling her awake. For a moment she was disoriented, the pale glow of morning filtering through the thin curtains, the hum of the radiator surprisingly steady for once. Then she remembered. Her eyes shot toward the bed. Sophie lay curled beneath the blankets, her small chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, cheeks still flushed but no longer ghostly pale. Relief loosened the knot in Elena's chest, and she exhaled a shaky breath. Only then did she notice him. Damien. Still there. He sat in the chair pulled close to Sophie's bedside, coat draped over the backrest, tie undone, the faint shadow of fatigue under his eyes. Yet he was awake, posture steady, gaze fixed on the child who had kept them both hostage through the night. For a man who ruled fear in whispers across the city, he looked almost human here, watching over a sleeping girl like she was the only thing that mattered. Elena pushed herself up slowly, rubbing her eyes. You stayed. Damien turned his head toward her, and something flickered in his eyes, an unreadable softness that unsettled her more than any threat could. I said I would. Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to remind him this wasn't his place, that he had no right. But the words felt empty in her mouth when the evidence of his vigil sat right in front of her. Sophie stirred then, her eyelids fluttering open. She blinked, confused, then broke into a faint smile when she saw him. Ice cream man, she whispered hoarsely. Damien leaned forward slightly, his voice gentler than Elena thought possible. Morning, princess. You gave us quite a scare. Sophie gave a weak giggle. I'm okay now. Elena pressed her lips together, brushing her daughter's hair back. You need to rest, sweetheart. Doctor's orders. Damien nodded, backing her words. She's right. No adventures today. Only cartoons and soup. Sophie's smile grew as her eyes fluttered shut again, drifting back to sleep. Silence lingered, heavy but not uncomfortable. Elena stood with her arms crossed, struggling to reconcile the sight of him. This man who had summoned a world-class doctor with a single phone call, who sat through the night in a cramped apartment, with the danger she felt pulsing beneath his skin. You didn't have to stay, she said finally, her voice low. I know. His reply was simple, but the weight of it settled deep inside her. Her chest tightened. Gratitude warred with fear. Pride battled with relief. She hated needing anyone, hated that he had seen her desperation. Yet watching him sit there, exhaustion clear in the lines of his shoulders, she couldn't deny the truth. For one night, she had not been alone, and that terrified her more than anything else. The days after Sophie's fever passed felt strangely heavy, as though the walls of the small apartment had soaked up the memory of that long night. Elena tried to push it aside, to bury the image of Damien sitting vigil, his shoulders broad but weary, his gaze fixed on Sophie as if nothing outside that room existed. But it haunted her, clinging to her thoughts at the diner, in the laundromat, even in the quiet moments when she brushed Sophie's hair. What unsettled her most was Sophie herself. Her daughter spoke of him often now, innocently, with the candor only children possessed. When can we see Ice Cream Man again? She asked one afternoon, crayons scattered across the table as she drew a lopsided figure in a suit beside a small girl holding a cone. Elena's throat tightened. Sophie, he's a busy man. He's not family. Sophie tilted her head, confusion shadowing her bright eyes. But he makes us safe. The words pierced deeper than Elena wanted to admit. Bills still piled on the counter, taunting her. Frank at the diner cut her hours again. The landlord's warnings grew sharper, his knocks at the door louder, more insistent. And always, that card in the drawer. Damien's name, his offer, burning a hole in her conscience. Each night, Elena sat at the table with her notebook, trying to stretch numbers that refused to bend. Her pencil dug into the paper until the lead snapped, and still the math screamed the same truth. She was drowning. Pride told her to resist. Pride reminded her that Damien Moretti wasn't the man she could ever fully trust. But Sophie's smile, Sophie's cough, Sophie's trust in the ice cream man whispered another truth. Maybe she no longer had the luxury of pride. The decision broke her in the smallest way. One evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep, Elena pulled out the card. Her hands trembled as she stared at the bold print. Moretti Group. A number beneath it. She dialed before she could change her mind. The line picked up instantly. His voice low, steady, unmistakable, washed over her. Her breath caught. He said her name like he'd been waiting for it. "I'll take the job," she whispered, her throat tight with guilt. "Whatever it is, I'll do it." There was silence on the other end, then a quiet exhale, almost like relief.
Good.
"You won't regret this." Her eyes burned as she hung up, but in her chest, beneath the fear and shame, a fragile ember of something else flickered. Hope. The very next day, the first change arrived. When Elena returned from the diner, she found Sophie spinning excitedly in the hallway, clutching a new stuffed rabbit, its fur soft and expensive. "Look, Mommy," he said, "it's a good luck friend for me." Elena's pulse quickened. "Damien." Her gaze shifted to the end of the hall where a pair of his men stood discreetly, dressed in black, their presence quiet but undeniable. It hit her then. Not just the gift, but the invisible net weaving itself around her life. Sophie was safer, yes, but safety had a price. And as she scooped her daughter into her arms, Elena realized she had just begun to pay it. Elena returned home from her shift at the diner to find Sophie buzzing with excitement in the hallway. The little girl practically bounced on her toes, her curls flying as she waved a folded sheet of paper in her hand. Mommy, guess what?" "What is it, sweetheart?" Elena asked, balancing the grocery bag against her hip, exhaustion pressing heavy on her shoulders. Sophie thrust the paper into her hands. A neatly typed letter. Official. Elegant. Elena's stomach turned before she even read the first line. Lease agreement. Unit 14B. Paid in full. Her heart thudded painfully. What is this? From the shadowed end of the corridor, a figure stepped forward. Damien. He wore no coat this time, only a dark suit that fit his frame like armor. His gaze found hers instantly, steady, calm, unreadable. "It's yours," he said simply. "A better place. Warmer. Safer. Closer to Sophie's school." Elena's chest tightened. "You can't just—" She cut herself off, glancing at Sophie's wide eyes. Her daughter clutched the paper like a golden ticket, her face glowing with hope. Damien's tone remained smooth, quiet, yet unyielding. "You accepted the job. Consider this part of it. A safer environment for you both." Elena swallowed hard, the letter trembling in her hand. "I didn't ask for charity." "This isn't charity," he replied evenly. "It's protection." His eyes lingered on Sophie as he spoke, and for the briefest moment, Elena saw something flicker there, something raw, almost vulnerable. The following afternoon, men arrived to help with boxes. Movers, efficient and silent, packed their meager belongings with a precision that made Elena feel like a spectator in her own life. Sophie darted from room to room, squealing at the thought of a new house. "Mommy, can I have a room with big windows? And maybe a desk for drawing?" Elena forced a smile, smoothing her daughter's hair. "We'll see, baby." But inside, guilt gnawed at her ribs. Each box sealed was another tether binding her to him. Unit 14B was nothing like their old place. Bright light spilled through wide windows. The walls were freshly painted, the air smelled faintly of cedar, and the heat hummed steady and warm. The kitchen gleamed with new appliances. The bedrooms were spacious, one already set with a small desk and shelves for books and toys. Sophie gasped, running straight to the desk. "Mommy,
Look.
it's perfect." Elena's chest cracked at the sight of her daughter's joy. For the first time in years, Sophie's world didn't feel cramped, cold, or fragile. But as Elena turned, she found Damien standing in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching the scene quietly. "You did this," she said softly, accusation and gratitude tangled together. Damien's gaze didn't waver. "I told you, Elena. She deserves more." Elena's lips pressed tight. "And what about what I deserve?" He studied her for a long moment, then answered with a quiet certainty that unsettled her more than anything else. You deserve not to be afraid. That night, after Sophie fell asleep in her new bed, Elena sat alone by the window, staring at the city lights sprawling beyond the glass. Her chest ached with contradiction, gratitude, fear, anger, relief. Every gesture of his pulled her deeper, and every step she took closer to him felt like losing ground she'd fought so hard to keep. Still, when she looked back at Sophie, curled safely in blankets she hadn't worried about affording, Elena whispered the truth she couldn't ignore. For her, maybe this is worth it. And in the hallway, though she didn't know it, Damien lingered for a moment longer before leaving, making sure the locks clicked into place, making sure their world remained untouched. He led them through a corridor lined with glass offices. Men and women in expensive clothes glanced up as they passed, curiosity flashing before quickly hidden behind lowered eyes. Damien's shadow carried weight here, undeniable, absolute. Finally, he opened a door to a smaller, sunlit office. A desk, a computer, shelves neatly arranged. Not lavish, but comfortable. This will be yours, he said simply. Elena blinked. Mine. A position within the company, Damien clarified, his tone calm, matter of fact. Legitimate work. Scheduling, documents, accounts. Nothing complicated. You'll be trained. Her pulse quickened. Why me? His gaze met hers, unwavering. Because you need it. And because I trust you. The words hit harder than she expected.
Trust.
A word she hadn't earned, hadn't asked for, yet carried a weight that both warmed and unsettled her. Sophie wandered to the window, pressing her small hands against the glass as the city sprawled below. Mommy, we're so high up, she squealed. Elena turned, torn between fear and awe. Careful, Sophie. Damien watched the child with a quiet intensity, his voice softer than Elena had ever heard. She has no fear. Elena's throat tightened. She's just a little girl. Yes, Damien agreed, his eyes lingering on Sophie. And she deserves a life where she can stay that way. The silence that followed was heavy. Elena felt her defenses falter, cracks forming where fear and pride had lived for so long. She nodded slowly, almost reluctantly. All right, I'll try. Damien's lips curved faintly, less a smile, more a quiet acknowledgement. That's all I ask. When they left the building later, Elena held Sophie's hand a little tighter, her heart warring with itself. She had taken the first step. Into his world. Into his orbit. And though every instinct warned her of the danger, another truth whispered beneath it. Sophie had smiled today in a way Elena hadn't seen in years. And that, perhaps, was worth the risk. The office smelled of polished wood and faint cologne, a sharp contrast to the scent of soap and lavender that clung to her little apartment. Elena sat stiffly at the desk Damien had given her, her hands folded too tightly in her lap. The monitor in front of her glowed with neat spreadsheets, columns of numbers that blurred when her mind wandered. She had worked before years ago, but this was different. This was his world, orderly, powerful, and watched by too many eyes. From the moment she arrived, she felt the stares. Men in crisp suits, women with heels clicking against marble floors. They glanced at her plain dress and tired face, then quickly looked away when they noticed Damien nearby. He had brought her in, which meant she was untouchable. Yet she still felt like an imposter seated at a desk that didn't belong to her. At noon, Sophie bounded into the office, with one of the secretaries trailing nervously behind her. She had insisted on bringing coloring books Damien had left in the corner of Elena's office. Mommy, look. Sophie held up a crayon drawing of a house. It's us. And this is Mr. Damien, see? I gave him a suit. Elena's stomach dropped. Sophie. But before she could scold her, a shadow fell across the doorway. Damien leaned casually against the frame, watching with an expression that was impossible to read. Sophie beamed, waving the paper at him. Do you like it? For a brief second, something softened in his eyes. He crouched to her level, taking the paper as though it were a priceless document. It's perfect, he said, his voice lower, warmer than Elena had ever heard. Her throat tightened. She hated that Sophie was becoming attached to him. Hated more that part of her felt relief when she saw how gently he spoke to her child. Later, during a quiet moment, Damien entered her office. He didn't sit, he never sat, but stood by the desk, his presence filling the room. "You're adapting quickly," he remarked, glancing at the neatly arranged files she had organized. Elena forced her tone to remain neutral. "I've managed offices before. This isn't new." "But the scale is new," he countered smoothly. "And the scrutiny." His gaze lingered on her face, as if reading the unease she tried to hide. "If anyone makes you uncomfortable, you'll tell me." "I don't need your protection," she said sharply, though the heat in her cheeks betrayed her. "No," he said, his voice calm but certain. "But Sophie does. And through her you do." The words struck deep, unraveling her defenses. She clenched her jaw, returning to her work before he could see the turmoil in her eyes. By evening, when she and Sophie finally left the building, Elena was exhausted. Not from the work itself, but from the weight of existing in his orbit all day. Sophie skipped beside her, humming happily, a new stuffed bear clutched in her hand, a gift she insisted had come from Mr. Damien's office. Elena's guilt grew heavier with every step home. She had taken the job for security, for Sophie's health, for survival. But with each passing day, she felt her walls weakening, brick by brick, replaced by something far more dangerous. Because in his world, nothing came without a price. The building always hummed with quiet efficiency, phones ringing in muted tones, the shuffle of papers, the steady rhythm of footsteps. But that afternoon, Elena noticed something different. A current of unease pulsed through the office, subtle but unmistakable. Men in suits moved more quickly, their expressions sharper, hushed conversations cut off when she walked by. She tried to focus on her files, on the numbers that needed organizing, but the tension in the air seeped through the walls, coiling around her nerves. Even Sophie seemed to feel it, her usually bubbly chatter subdued as she sat coloring in the corner of Elena's office. It was nearly 5 when she stepped out to deliver a stack of signed papers to Damien's office. She told herself she would simply drop them off and leave. But as she approached, the sound of raised voices reached her ears. The door was slightly ajar. "Elena," she whispered under her breath, willing herself to turn around, to respect boundaries. But curiosity, sharp and unwelcome, rooted her to the spot. Inside, Damien's voice was low, hard. A tone she had never heard from him before. "You think you can steal from me?" A man stammered in reply, words muffled, desperate. The sound of a chair scraping harshly across the floor followed, then a sharp thud that made Elena flinch. Her pulse hammered. She leaned just enough to glimpse inside. Damien stood tall, unyielding, his hand gripping the edge of the desk. In front of him, another man knelt on the floor, his lips split, blood dripping onto the polished wood. The air in the room vibrated with menace. Damien's presence, so gentle with Sophie, so careful around her, had transformed into something dangerous, cold, absolute. Elena jerked back, heart pounding. The stack of papers in her hand felt suddenly heavy, her palms damp against them. She stumbled backward, nearly colliding with one of Damien's men stationed near the hallway. His eyes flicked to her, unreadable, but he said nothing. She hurried back to her office, her legs unsteady. Sophie looked up, smiling innocently. "Mommy, you're back. Look, I drew another picture. This one's us at the park." Elena forced a smile, her chest tight. She gathered Sophie into her arms, holding her a little too close, her mind reeling with the image of the blood on Damien's floor. The man she had begun to trust, the one who sat by Sophie's bedside, who offered her a lifeline when she had none, was also the man who commanded fear and violence with nothing more than his voice. And for the first time, Elena truly wondered if she had made a terrible mistake stepping into his world. Elena had barely managed to steady her breathing when a knock came at her door. 3 measured raps, controlled, deliberate. Her stomach turned. She knew who it was. Before she could compose an excuse, the door opened. Damien stepped inside, his suit as immaculate as ever, his expression calm, almost unreadable. No trace of the storm she had glimpsed only minutes before remained on his face. But Elena couldn't unsee it. The man kneeling, the blood, the cold steel in Damien's voice. Working late? His gaze flicked to the papers still clutched in her trembling hands. Elena forced her fingers to unclench, setting the stack down on her desk with a thud. I was just finishing some reports. Her voice betrayed her, thinner than usual. Sophie bounded up, waving her drawing. Look, Mr. Damien. I drew us again. This time Mommy's making pancakes. Damien's eyes softened instantly. He crouched, taking the paper as though it were the most important document he'd held all day. You've got quite the artist's hand, he said gently. Elena's throat tightened. How could the same man who had terrified her moments ago speak so tenderly to her child now? When Sophie skipped off to fetch more crayons, silence stretched between them. Damien remained crouched for a moment, then rose slowly, his gaze locking onto Elena. You saw something you weren't meant to, he said quietly. Not a question, an observation. Her breath caught, but she didn't deny it. His expression remained calm, but there was a weight in his eyes, a flicker of something he rarely revealed. Elena, I won't insult you by pretending I'm something I'm not. My world, it's not gentle. His voice dropped lower, almost a warning. But it will never touch Sophie. Or you. Elena swallowed hard, fighting the storm inside her. She wanted to demand answers, to ask how he could speak of safety while blood still stained the floor of his office. But Sophie's laughter rang out, sweet and oblivious, and the words lodged in her throat. Damien's gaze softened then, as though he sensed the war within her. If Sophie ever needs anything, if she falls sick again, if anything worries you, you call me. No hesitation. Understood. Elena nodded stiffly, unable to form words. He studied her for a moment longer, as if searching her face for trust that wasn't there. Then, with a controlled breath, he straightened his cuffs. I'll let you finish your work. And just like that, he was gone. That night, long after she put Sophie to bed, Elena lay awake, staring at the ceiling. His voice echoed in her mind, gentle for Sophie, hard as steel for everyone else. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just standing in Damien Moretti's orbit. She was caught between two versions of him, and she didn't know which one would consume her first. The morning sun slipped through the blinds, casting golden stripes across Elena's desk. She didn't move immediately, staring blankly at the papers in front of her, her mind replaying the scene in Damien's office, the kneeling man, the blood, the cold authority that had silenced her. Sophie bounced into the office, backpack slung over one shoulder, cheeks flushed with excitement. Mommy, can we see Mr. Damien today? Elena froze, her heart tightened. She wanted to say yes, to let her daughter's innocent joy dictate her actions. But fear rose first, sharp and relentless. No, Sophie, today we need to focus on your homework, she said, forcing a calmness she didn't feel. Sophie's smile faltered. But he brought me crayons last time, and he said I could draw anything I want. He's fun. Elena swallowed, guilt gnawing at her ribs. I know, baby, but sometimes people are busy. Sophie's lower lip trembled. I want him here. I like him. Her words stabbed at Elena, each one a reminder of the life she had chosen and the life she feared. That day, Elena avoided Damien's calls. She didn't answer the texts that popped up like tiny alarms on her phone. Every vibration made her stomach twist. But Sophie noticed. When she asked why they weren't visiting, Elena offered only vague excuses, forcing a tight smile. Sophie's eyes filled with confusion and hurt. Mommy, you're keeping him away from me, she whispered one evening as they sat coloring in the apartment. Elena's chest ached. She pressed her lips together, shaking her head. No, baby, it's complicated. He has work to do. Sophie's small hands clenched the crayons. I don't care about work. I just want him here. Elena closed her eyes, biting back the guilt that threatened to overwhelm her. She doesn't understand. She doesn't know the danger. She doesn't know the blood in his world. That night, Elena lay awake, watching Sophie sleep. The small rise and fall of her chest, the faint hum of the radiator. It all felt fragile, impossible. She hated Damien. She feared him. She knew she shouldn't trust him. And yet, every fiber of her being whispered that she couldn't keep Sophie safe without him. Her phone vibrated. She reached for it hesitantly, Damien's name flashing on the screen. She stared at it, thumb hovering over the answer button. I can't. Not yet. Not like this. She turned the phone over, setting it face down. But even as she closed her eyes, guilt wrapped around her like chains. She had pulled away to protect Sophie and herself. Yet in doing so, she had hurt the one person who had come to mean more than safety, more than security, her daughter. And somewhere in the shadows of the city, Damien Moretti knew. Sophie stirred in her sleep, murmuring something Elena couldn't catch. Her tiny hand curled over the blanket, and Elena pressed her own hand to her daughter's. I'm trying, baby, she whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. I promise I'm trying. But deep down, Elena knew the distance she had created wouldn't last long. Damien's world was relentless, and he wouldn't allow her or Sophie to be left unprotected. And soon the pull would bring them all back together. Elena had convinced herself she was in control. She had kept Damien's calls unanswered, refused his messages, and tried to make Sophie see that fun visits were a luxury they couldn't afford. But the moment came when control slipped through her fingers entirely. It was late afternoon. Sophie was coloring at the table, humming softly to herself, when the doorbell rang. Elena froze. The sound made her stomach plummet. He's here. Sophie ran to the door before Elena could stop her. It's Mr. Damien. I know it. Elena's pulse thundered. She pressed a hand against her chest, swallowing. Sophie, no, stay here. But the little girl had already swung the door open. There he stood, calm, impeccably dressed, yet with the faintest edge in his gaze that made Elena's blood run cold. Behind him, two men in dark suits lingered silently, unnoticed by Sophie. Hello, princess, Damien said softly, crouching to Sophie's level. I see my artist has been busy. Sophie grinned, holding up her drawing. I made you a castle, Mr. Damien. He took it, studying it as if it were a priceless artifact. A castle, perfect for protecting the queen and her little knight, he said gently. Elena's heart clenched. Sophie's laughter rang out, pure and unafraid, and a pang of guilt stabbed at her. Mommy, Sophie said, tugging at her hand. He stayed with me that night. Can he stay again? Elena's chest tightened. Sweetheart, she began, but Damien interrupted softly. I'm here because she matters, he said evenly, his gaze meeting Elena's. Because she's safe now, but I will not let that safety be threatened again. Elena swallowed, fighting to remain composed. I don't need your help. You do, he said, voice low, undeniable. And Sophie needs it too. That much is clear. He stepped inside, his men slipping silently behind him. He didn't force his way, didn't demand entry, yet the entire apartment seemed to shift under his presence.
Calm.
Absolute. Commanding. Sophie ran into his arms, and for a fleeting second, Elena saw the softness of Damien, the man who had cradled her fevered child, who had stayed awake all night, who had cared without question. And then she remembered the man in his office, the one who demanded obedience with a single word, who could make blood-stained polished wood with terrifying precision. Elena pressed her hands to her mouth, caught between fear and gratitude. Damien looked at her, steady, patient, but firm. Elena, I am not asking for permission. I am ensuring safety. For Sophie and for you. That is all. Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue. She wanted to run. But Sophie's laughter, her innocent joy, anchored her. I understand, Elena whispered. He gave a single nod, his gaze softening just enough to remind her of the man she had come to trust. Good. That is enough for now. That evening, as Damien left, Elena watched him disappear into the shadows of the hallway, the faint hum of the city pressing against the walls of their apartment. Sophie curled against her side, eyes heavy. Mom, I like him. Elena pressed a kiss to her daughter's hair. I know, baby. I know. And in that moment, she realized, no matter how hard she tried to keep her distance, Damien's world, dark, dangerous, and all-consuming, had already begun to pull them in. The threads were woven too tightly now, and soon, Elena would have no choice but to step fully into his orbit. The next morning, Elena woke to the sound of a soft knock on the door. Her heart leapt into her throat. Mommy, he's here. Sophie's excited whisper floated through the hallway. Elena hesitated but opened the door. Damien stood there, calm, composed, a briefcase in hand. Behind him, a delivery man carried a small stack of boxes. For Sophie, Damien said simply, lifting one box onto the floor. New clothes, books, toys. Nothing extravagant, just improvements. Sophie squealed, diving into the box. Mommy, look. He brought me a castle set. Elena bit her lip, guilt twisting in her stomach. She had wanted distance, yet the sight of her daughter's pure joy made it impossible to stay angry. Over the next few days, subtle changes swept through their lives. Groceries arrived without her asking. Bills that had been overdue months were quietly paid. Even the apartment's minor repairs, leaking faucet, creaky floorboards, were addressed before Elena had to lift a finger. Sophie thrived. She laughed more, slept better, and her schoolwork improved with Damien's quiet support. Each new toy, each extra care, each small gesture of attention reminded Elena that her daughter was safer, happier, better than she had ever been able to provide alone. And yet, every act of kindness was a reminder she was no longer fully in control. One evening, as Elena unpacked a set of books from one of Damien's deliveries, Sophie ran in holding a plush bear. Mommy, look. He says goodnight to me every night. Elena's chest ached. Sophie, she began, but her daughter interrupted, hugging the bear tightly. Damien appeared in the doorway, leaning casually against the frame. Good evening, both of you. Good evening, Elena murmured, brushing a hand through Sophie's hair. She felt the weight of the world pressing down, his world, their old life, the fragile safety he provided. He studied them both, gaze softer than it had been the day he entered the apartment, yet still commanding. Everything is in order here. Your bills, your apartment, Sophie's needs, they are all taken care of. Elena's fingers trembled slightly. I can manage, Damien. Perhaps, he said, voice calm, precise. But I prefer certainty. Sophie looked up at him, eyes wide. Mommy, he really does care, doesn't he? Elena swallowed hard. She nodded silently, unable to speak. She hated how right her daughter was. That night, Elena sat alone in the quiet apartment, the hum of the radiator like a heartbeat. She looked around, the warm light, the neatly stacked books, Sophie's toys spread across the floor, and realized how much their lives had changed in just a few weeks. Damien's protection was tangible. It was comforting, and it was terrifying, because every comfort he provided was a reminder that their safety came at the price of proximity to a man whose world she could barely comprehend. Her heart tightened as she whispered into the dark, Am I ready for this world for him? And somewhere in the shadows of the city, Damien Moretti ensured that question would have to be answered sooner than she expected. The apartment smelled of fresh linens and polished wood, a quiet testament to Damien's careful orchestration. Sunlight spilled across the living room as Sophie played with her new castle set, humming happily. Elena moved through the space almost automatically, unpacking books and arranging Sophie's toys. Everything was orderly, perfect, but that perfection came with a weight she couldn't shake. Mid-morning, a sharp knock sounded at the door. Elena stiffened, instinctively glancing toward the peephole. Two men in dark suits stood outside, their expressions neutral but unyielding. Her stomach clenched. She knew these faces, people she hadn't met before, yet clearly part of Damien's world. Before fear could fully settle, the door opened, and Damien stepped inside, his presence immediately filling the room. Everything okay? Elena asked, her voice taut. Perfectly fine, he said, but his gaze lingered on the men outside the doorway. I sent them with a message. Nothing for you to worry about. Sophie, oblivious, waved at the men.
Hi.
I'm Sophie. The two agents nodded politely, then left. Damien closed the door behind them, and Elena exhaled shakily. I don't like this, she admitted quietly. You will learn to, he said softly, a hint of steel under the gentleness in his tone. The world isn't always kind, Elena. But while you're under my protection, you will be safe. That is all that matters. Elena nodded, swallowing hard. Sophie's laughter from across the room reminded her why she had accepted his help, but the shadow of Damien's other life pressed against her chest like a cold hand. That evening, Damien lingered longer than usual, helping Sophie with a drawing she insisted was for him. He praised her creativity, guided her tiny hands with care, and even helped her make a small castle tower out of blocks. Elena watched quietly. She hated how easily her daughter was drawn to him. She hated the fear she still felt. Yet she couldn't deny the relief of having someone so capable watching over them, someone whose world was dangerous, yes, but whose intent was absolute protection. As Damien finally rose to leave, he looked at Elena, voice gentle but commanding. Enjoy this life while you can. And remember, any time danger approaches, I will be there. Sophie waved enthusiastically, calling after him. Bye, Mr. Damien. See you tomorrow. Elena forced a smile, pressing her lips together. Inside, she knew it wasn't just another visit. It was a promise and a warning. The shadows of his world were creeping closer, subtle but inevitable. And Elena realized, with a mixture of fear and helpless awe, that she was already entwined in it. Her life, her daughter's life, was no longer entirely their own. Elena had spent the morning tidying the apartment, Sophie happily occupied with her new coloring books. The city outside gleamed in the late spring sun, peaceful, ordinary. And that peace made the sudden pounding at the door all the more jarring. Elena's heart skipped. Sophie froze mid-crayon stroke, looking up at her mother. Mommy, the little girl whispered, uncertainty tugging at her voice. Elena's mind raced as she approached the door slowly, instinct screaming that this was not ordinary visitors or delivery. She peeked through the peephole. Two men stood there, unfamiliar, yet their posture radiated a quiet menace. Her stomach dropped.
Not now.
Please, not now. Before she could act, the door swung open. The men stepped inside, their expressions neutral, but the air around them vibrated with silent threat. Elena Alvarez, one said, voice clipped, controlled. You need to listen carefully. Panic twisted her chest. Sophie ran to her side, clutching her hand. Suddenly, the front door clicked behind them, and Damien appeared, calm, composed, every inch the man who could command a city with a single word. His gaze swept the room, taking in the intruders, Sophie and Elena. Gentlemen, he said, voice low but lethal, I suggest you leave immediately. The two men froze, and Elena's heart hammered as she watched. Damien's eyes darkened, and something in his posture shifted, silent, precise, absolute control. They've been warned, one said, voice tight. They were warned too late, Damien replied, voice as cold and sharp as steel. And now you leave. In a blur, the intruders turned and exited, the tension evaporating as quickly as it had arrived. Damien closed the door behind them, then turned to Elena and Sophie. You're safe, he said softly, crouching to meet Sophie's wide eyes. Nothing will harm you here. Ever. Sophie hugged him tightly. I knew you'd save me. Elena's throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to remind herself of his world, to resist the magnetism of his protection, but the fear, the relief, and the undeniable reality of his power silenced her. Later that evening, after Sophie had gone to bed, Elena sat on the couch, staring into the darkened room. Damien's quiet authority, his absolute control over the situation, had left her shaken, but also oddly reassured. She had resisted him. She had tried to pull away. And yet, he had been there. He had kept them safe. He had proven once again that whatever shadows his world cast, he would always be the shield between them and danger. Elena realized then that the life she had chosen, her daughter's life, was now bound to his. And no matter how much she feared it, she couldn't step back anymore. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the radiator and the faint ticking of the wall clock. Elena had just tucked Sophie into bed, smoothing her daughter's curls one last time. "Good night, Mommy," Sophie whispered, yawning. "Good night, Mr. Damien." Elena froze. Her eyes followed the small shadow in the corner where Damien sat, reading Sophie a bedtime story. He had insisted on staying tonight, claiming it was for safety, but Elena couldn't shake the feeling of intrusion, though the sight of Sophie's radiant smile made it almost bearable. Damien's voice was gentle, entirely unlike the controlled authority Elena had glimpsed in his office. "Now, Princess, where do we put the dragon so it doesn't scare the knight?" Sophie giggled, pointing to her toy castle.
Here.
"He can hide behind the tower." Elena swallowed, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't felt in years. She moved to the doorway, watching Damien bend low to help Sophie arrange the toys. Every small gesture, every patient word, made her pulse flutter with an odd mixture of relief and guilt. After tucking Sophie in completely, Elena turned to leave, but Damien's voice stopped her. "Sit with me for a moment," he said softly. Her hesitation was brief. She couldn't refuse. She crossed the room and perched on the edge of Sophie's bed, hands folded tightly in her lap. He leaned back in the chair, observing the room with a quiet vigilance. "You're tired," he noted. "I am," she admitted. Her eyes traced the neat arrangement of Sophie's toys, the freshly made bed, the sense of order Damien had already brought into their small apartment. "You've done well," he said, voice even calm. "But there's no reason for you to carry it all alone." Elena felt the sting of tears. I'm trying. I always try to keep her safe." "You've done enough," he said firmly. "Tonight, I'll handle the rest." Hours passed quietly. Damien stayed in the living room, a silent guardian, reading documents on his tablet while Elena sat nearby, finishing some light household tasks. Every so often, he would glance towards Sophie's room, ensuring she slept peacefully. Elena noticed how natural it felt, his presence, quiet but protective, filling the apartment with a sense of safety she hadn't realized she craved. She had resisted, had tried to keep him at a distance, yet here he was, effortlessly taking over the burden of protection she had carried alone for so long. By midnight, Elena found herself curled on the sofa, watching him from across the room. He looked calm, focused, yet there was a subtle tension in his posture, the ever-present readiness to act if danger appeared. And in that moment, she realized something she hadn't admitted even to herself. She was beginning to depend on him. The next morning, Sophie woke to find Damien making breakfast in the kitchen. Pancakes. Perfectly golden, with a small smiley face drawn in syrup on each one. "Good morning, Princess," he said warmly, handing her a plate. "Sleep well?" Sophie nodded eagerly, tucking into her pancakes. "I did. And I'm so happy you stayed." Elena stood in the doorway, feeling an ache of conflicting emotions. Gratitude, relief, and the uncomfortable awareness that she had begun to rely on him, not just for protection, but for stability, for Sophie's happiness, for herself. Damien's gaze met hers briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. He didn't force conversation. He didn't demand trust. But the way he cared for Sophie, for their little world, it was impossible to ignore. And Elena knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Damien showed up in the afternoon with groceries. Elena didn't know how to react. He had walked in quietly, carrying 2 heavy paper bags filled with fresh produce, meat, and things she could never afford to buy herself. She had opened her mouth to protest, but Sophie's squeal cut her off. "Strawberries? Mommy, look, he brought strawberries." Sophie rushed forward, hugging his leg as if he were a returning father. Damien only smiled faintly, lowering the bags onto the counter. "I thought you might like something fresh," he said, his voice calm, almost casual. "And Sophie deserves the best." Elena's lips pressed together as she watched him unpack, neatly arranging things into cupboards as if he had always belonged there. It unsettled her, yet also filled her with an odd warmth she couldn't push away. Days turned into weeks, and Damien's presence became routine. Sometimes he arrived in the afternoons, helping Sophie with small math puzzles at the kitchen table. Other times, he sat cross-legged on the living room floor, building castles from colorful blocks as Sophie chattered happily. Elena often stood nearby, pretending to be busy, but secretly watching. Watching the way Sophie's eyes lit up when Damien praised her. Watching how carefully he listened to her endless stories. Watching how he never lost patience. He wasn't just protecting them anymore, he was present. And Elena couldn't deny how different life felt with him around. One evening, as rain pattered softly against the windows, Damien stayed for dinner. Elena had cooked something simple, rice, beans, and chicken, but the way he sat at the table, perfectly at ease, made the modest meal feel like a family gathering. Sophie laughed, retelling a story about her teacher, and Damien listened intently, his rare smile lingering at the corners of his mouth. Elena caught herself staring. He looked so different here, almost normal. After Sophie was asleep, Elena moved to clear the table. Damien rose without a word and began drying dishes beside her. Their arms brushed occasionally, and the quiet rhythm of domesticity wrapped around them like a fragile thread. "You don't have to do that," she murmured. "I want to," he said simply. His voice carried no weight of authority, no command, just quiet sincerity. Elena's chest tightened. She realized she wasn't waiting for him to leave anymore. She was waiting for him to stay. By the end of the month, Damien had woven himself seamlessly into their days. Sophie expected him to be there, asking each morning if Mr. Damien would visit after school. And Elena, she had stopped telling herself that this was temporary. Every time the door opened and he stepped inside, a knot in her chest loosened. The fear of unpaid bills, the loneliness of nights without company, the constant worry over Sophie's safety, all of it faded in his presence. And though she never admitted it aloud, Elena knew she had begun to depend on him. It was a late Saturday afternoon when Elena found Damien sitting on the balcony, a rare moment of stillness surrounding him. The city stretched out below, glowing in the fading light, but his eyes were fixed on something distant, something unseen. Sophie had just fallen asleep on the couch, a blanket tucked around her, clutching the stuffed bear Damien had bought her a week earlier. Elena moved quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea. She placed one in front of him. "You don't usually sit outside," she said softly. He looked at her, then down at the steaming cup. "I don't usually stay anywhere long enough." The words lingered, heavy with something she couldn't name. Elena sat beside him, the cool breeze brushing her hair across her face. She pushed it back, waiting for him to continue. For the first time since he had entered her life, Damien spoke of himself, not the mafia boss she had pieced together in fragments, but the man beneath. "I grew up with responsibility I never asked for," he said evenly, his gaze still fixed on the skyline. Every decision, every step, it was always about control, protection, power. Elena's chest tightened. She wanted to ask questions, but fear and caution kept her quiet. "I don't regret it," he went on, "but I know what it cost me. I never thought I'd sit at a table with a child and read her stories, or share a meal that wasn't about negotiation. It's different here. With you. With Sophie." Elena's fingers curled around her cup. "With us." The thought struck her harder than she expected. The evening was quiet, the kind of calm that made Elena uneasy. Rain tapped lightly against the windows, and Sophie had already drifted into sleep, curled with her bear and a faint smile on her lips. Elena was in the kitchen, wiping down the counter, when she felt his presence behind her. Damien never startled her anymore. She had grown used to his silence, the way he filled a room without needing words. "You're working too late," he said softly. "I'm only tidying up." Her voice was gentle, though her hands trembled slightly as she set the cloth aside. When she turned, he was closer than she expected. His eyes, usually unreadable, held a rare intensity, not sharp with control, but heavy with something deeper.
Oh.
His voice was low, certain. I've built my life on promises. To people, to power, to control. But tonight, I have only one promise that matters. Her heart thudded, her breath caught. I want to spend my life protecting you and Sophie. To make sure you never struggle, never fear, never doubt your safety again. He paused, his jaw tightening. I can't give you a perfect world, but I can give you mine. Every shield, every strength, every part of me. I want a life with you. The words fell like iron, steady and unshakable. Elena stared at him, every thought colliding in her mind. He hadn't knelt. He hadn't brought a ring. Yet the weight of his vow was heavier than any tradition. The weeks that followed felt different, quieter, steadier, almost like a dream Elena was afraid to wake from. Damien no longer came and went like a visitor. He stayed, his shoes by the door, his jacket on the coat rack, his watch left on the counter at night. It unsettled her at first, his presence woven into the fabric of their days, but soon it became something she couldn't imagine living without. Sophie, of course, had welcomed it immediately, proudly telling her classmates that Mr. Damien lives with us now. Elena would blush, try to correct her, but the truth hung in the air. He did live with them. Mornings began with the scent of strong coffee brewing, Damien already awake before sunrise, reading reports at the kitchen table. Sophie would climb onto his lap, chattering about dreams or what she wanted for breakfast. He listened with complete attention, adjusting his schedule to match hers, as though she were his only priority. Elena often lingered in the doorway, watching. A part of her still whispered warnings about who he really was. But another part, stronger, louder, told her that this was what she had always wanted. A man who made her daughter feel safe, who shouldered the weight she had carried alone for too long. One evening, while Sophie was busy coloring at the coffee table, Damien sat beside Elena on the couch. He didn't speak at first. His hand rested lightly on hers, grounding her. Finally, he turned to her, his gaze steady. "Elena," he said quietly, "I meant what I said. I want a life with you. Not halfway. Not in pieces. A life." Her heart pounded. She remembered his earlier promise, the way he had asked without a ring, without ceremony, only certainty. For weeks she had wrestled with it, afraid to step into something she couldn't control. But tonight, as she glanced at Sophie humming happily beside them, the decision no longer felt like a question. She met his eyes. Her lips trembled, but the words came. "Yes, Damien. I want that life too." His hand tightened over hers, the faintest exhale escaping him, as if the weight he carried had finally eased. Sophie looked up, curious. "What did you say, Mommy?" Elena smiled through the tears gathering in her eyes. "I said, we're going to be a family." Sophie squealed, abandoning her crayons to throw herself into Damien's arms. "I knew it. I knew you'd stay forever." Damien held her close, his usually impassive expression softening as he looked over Sophie's head at Elena. His gaze promised everything: protection, loyalty, permanence. That night, after Sophie was asleep, Damien lingered at Elena's side. "You will never regret this," he told her, his voice low, a vow wrapped in steel. "No shadow of my world will ever touch you. You and Sophie will always live in the light." Elena wanted to believe him, and for the first time she almost fully did. But deep inside, a quiet fear whispered, what if the shadows came anyway?